Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Dumelang. Welcome to Frank Dialogue. Thank you to every single one of you for accepting our invitation, including those who RSVP'd at 5 o'clock. Part of what we need to fix, Mr. Songezo, we'll have to fix this thing, or maybe there must be a Zulu word for RSVP. I'm not sure what it is. Because if I ask somebody here randomly, what does RSVP stand for? They may not know, and maybe that's part of the trouble. But for those of you who, despite not knowing what RSVP exactly stands for, did so, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. Tonight we focus on the future of South Africa, really to say what are the options? What are the options that are facing us, that are staring us in the face? The electorate next year, in 6 months or so, will go to the polls. Hopefully nothing comes in the way, like a pandemic and so on. I saw something yesterday on that apparently the next pandemic is already on the way. But that may be fake news, so please don't listen to me. Right? So barring anything dramatic, will be at the polls in 6 months to say who should govern South Africa. Basically, who should shape the future of our children and generations to come. Because it is that kind of election. It's not your normal election, walk in the park, oh no, this is predetermined, stuff like that. We hope so. And that's why we need to start talking about options for our future. Not just, the green and the gold and the red. No. What are the options for our future? How are we going to shape this future? And I hope that tonight we will do that. We are hosting here as our guest of honor, SONGEZO ZIBI, who is the leader of Rise Mzansi. Please, can we welcome him warmly? I deliberately did not read his long profile because that will need a whole dialogue on its own. But I know that he's from one of the poorest provinces of our country. Although that same province is called the home of legends. So that is the silver lining. So I want to believe, having known him for years, that he's the stuff that legends are made of. That one you can be sure. You don't have to agree with him. But he's the stuff that legends are made of. And it's interesting because, when you ask SONGEZO he says, no, it doesn't matter. All of us can step up to the plate. And he used to say, and I hope you won't say that today, to say, like people like you are just sitting here talking, are you going to do something? Please, I'm the one asking the questions now when you come here. Right? So SONGEZO, I want to congratulate you, first of all, to stepping up to the plate. And I'm looking forward to hearing really the policy statement about why Rise Mzansi. There are so many parties coming out of the woodwork. I'm told there's some 400 parties. It's a mountain to climb to say, forget the 399, focus on this one. It must stand out. And I hope that what we are going to hear tonight will help us to do that. I'm not alone. I'm with Jessica Dube, who's on the audience there. I just want, Jessica, good evening to start. Let's welcome Jessica Dube. It's going to be helping me to... Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Friday off to a good start, because Friday begins in the evening, not in the morning. We're excited to be doing this conversation, and JJ, I know that you would like to hear everybody's expectations on the floor. Before we get into that, a warm welcome to every one of our guests. Please enjoy yourself, relax, and let your brain do some serious thinking as we come up with solutions and as we probe the question at hand about the contestation for the future of our country. JJ, those words were long. Behind the scenes and the public contestation for the future of South Africa. Those were long words, but those were serious words. There are many here who have children. You're thinking about the kind of South Africa that your children will grow up in. You're thinking about your plans for your future in the country. And JJ, I did something quite interesting. I went and I looked up the words South Africa's future on Google. And these were some of the article titles that I found, the titles. Are you ready? The first one was South Africa's perilous journey. Our nation's future is either good, bad, or downright ugly. The second one was South Africa is scraping into the future. Now, I'm not going to say which news agencies these were, because I know then it's going to start another dialogue. The other one was South Africa's future will be decided in our cities. And the other one was the mood in South Africa is one of disappointment, but a rebound is possible. Future scenarios reveal. What I also find interesting is that when the Springboks came home, we saw a unity in South Africa that we haven't seen in years. A ball shaped like the inside of an olive, and us winning that tournament brought us more together than some very serious issues that we face. So on that note, if you could go to a fan park and scream your lungs out, that means tonight you can definitely talk at the Frank Dialogue. Right so I'm going to go around to some tables, and we just want to hear what are your expectations for this evening. And as I literally start moving around, some of you decided to look down, check your phones. Some of you are like, hey, public speaking is not for me, but tonight we are going to talk. So I am going to start at table, who's it going to be? Maybe you guys can help me choose a table. Where am I going first? Okay, I'm going to choose. I'd like to come to this table. I must come over here. Okay. Who are we speaking to? Who are we speaking to at this table? Hello, sir. Please stand. Please introduce yourselves to everyone. I will hold the mic. Introduce yourselves to everyone and tell us what are your expectations for tonight's Frank Dialogue.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lindo, primarily in the education sector as well as the psychology sector. But as a fellow South African, I have many concerns about the future and the state of this country. Number one, how the corruption of government officials has basically had a very serious impact on the decline in service delivery, particularly healthcare, education, how that's also impacting the quality of education as it stands. We're seeing a lot of teachers, and not just, teachers who are qualified and are very good at what they do, seeking alternative options such as going abroad instead of basically staying within our country. So I think today my focus is basically having dialogue about how we want to combat corruption through transparency, how we want to basically improve service delivery. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do we have any... I heard a yebo. I love it. I love it. The Zulu Nation always, loud and proud. So how are you doing? Please stand.
Kunjani siswami? Igama Brian Ntombela from Gumalven Athletics Club. I'm doing arts and sports. So mina ngibheke ukuzwa ukuthi this new party ekhona, how are they going to solve the problem yama artists in South Africa? Because I ashona engenalutho kodwa ebenesebenza sibheka ama-athlete asuffering COVID angasizwa umuntu nathi mthethwa edla imali nabangani bakhe nang namanje uzize kodwa ukhona is not doing anything. Ibhili iseparliament iphasile anytime now uRamaphosa ngayisayina. That means our rights ayahamba athathwa zigebengu ze-ANC. Please, if ningakwazi ukusisiza kulokho nje singajabula kakhulu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come now for us to listen to the leader of Rise Zansi, Mr. SONGEZO ZIBI. Please, let's put our hands together and welcome him onto the stage. I think you're going to hold this thing because this doesn't work. It falls. Yeah.
Okay, JJ. Thank you, JJ. There's a tendency to call me Mr. SONGEZO ZIBI by people who call me all sorts of names, ordinarily. So generally they say the songs, actually, or songs. And then they stand up here, and they say Mr. SONGEZO ZIBI. But they don't use that elsewhere, so please be consistent, including you, JJ. Thank you, JJ, for inviting me here and for allowing me to make a short initial provocation ahead of our conversation. I also want to thank everybody who took time off from Groove on a Friday to be here. I promise I will only speak for an hour and a half in the tradition of CICs and so on and so forth. So it is with the deepest respect that I make the subsequent remarks about older generations. I do not mean any disrespect, but some things have to be said. And if there's anyone in this room who is older than me, I am not targeting you, but we have to speak certain truths. So this is not just a presentation about what our policy positions are and so on. What's really important is that we speak about the state of our country. And we speak about what's being done to shape its future, while many of us are not even looking. So JJ, 5 December will mark a decade since former President Mandela died. Caught up in the grief of the moment back then, I do not think we reflected enough on the fact that it was the end of an era. His generation is gone. I think the chief that passed away some months ago was probably the last of that generation who were 90-something years old. He's gone, they are all gone. They are never going to come back. A decade after Madiba's departure, we now have the end of another era, that of the 1940s and 50s generation. The generation of President Mbeki, who is now 81 years old this year. Jacob Zuma is also 81. Our current president is 71. He's looking at another term. Respectfully, to paraphrase Madiba in the 1990s, when he got sick and the rand tanked and there was panic in the markets and so on, he instructed Joel Netshitenze to issue a statement telling everyone to just sit the F down. And he said something like this, that it is common knowledge that I have less days ahead of me than the days I have lived. Which meant he was saying, guys, I am going to die one of these days. You can't panic every time I get a flu. So what I'm trying to say with the deepest of respect is that these people won't be around for long. They continue, however, to command national attention. Now, the same is true of the 1960s generation, who are either in retirement or about to retire, except those, of course, who are in politics, who are still looking for their turn at the union buildings, at a premiership, and various other positions. They are old. They await their turn to be the old men who shape a future they will never see. This is a new phenomenon, by the way. Our president was 39 years old when he was Secretary General of the ANC. His counterpart, Rolf Meyer, I believe, was either 37 or 41, but they're 2 years apart. It is unthinkable these days to have someone of that generation shaping the future of the country. That is not a good thing. It is not a good thing. So I get a sense that many of us cannot imagine a future without these seniors, or at least those of its members who dominate the national stage and oversee our national decline. We hang on to every word they say. We shout at each other. We argue. We comment. Our fingers burn our smartphones as we get caught up in whatever they say, which often produces nothing. Nothing good anyway. In turn, some of them also cannot imagine a South Africa in which their words don't command national attention, and their ideas determine our national destiny. They see themselves still as holding the center in determining South Africa's future. I have looked around the room. Most people here are fairly young. They don't see you. You don't matter. They don't see you, and you don't matter. And I will share some information shortly. But meanwhile, time is doing what time does, which is to introduce irrelevance to certain ideas and ways of thinking. If we were a nation that values political and social imagination, this current crisis is a profound opportunity to reset our democracy. Yet it is not. The political language, the political culture and political attitudes remain rooted in the old, which has now decayed and is riddled with intellectual stagnation, rent-seeking, lack of national purpose, and corruption. That is the place to which they have brought us to. This is also an era characterized by self-imposed paralysis among those who should care the most about the direction and future of our country. In the presence of these seniors, it feels like too many of us continue to see ourselves as too small, too young, too insignificant to do anything other than cheer, to jeer, or to passively comment. This matches the crisis identified by Antonio Gramsci, in that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. These symptoms are raging in our society, such as hunger, inequality, lawlessness, unemployment, runaway cost of living, and so much more. In the early days of mobilizing support for Rise Mzansi, we would get asked, which big fish are with you? Who's with you? Who's going to endorse you? In other words, we needed to produce some celebrity old politician from this same generation who would give us the stamp of legitimacy we apparently needed to get all of you excited. We had to produce the old in order to deliver the new. We had to produce the old in order to deliver the new. Now say what you will about Madiba and all the insults that get thrown at him. But it matters that Trevor Manuel was in his mid-50s when he retires as the longest-serving finance minister in the world. In his mid-50s. He stepped down. He took over as Minister of Finance, I think at 37 or 38. You usher the new with the new, not with the old. And so we refused to produce these old people. We continue to refuse. The question comes up again and again. Which old men and old women will endorse you so that we can know that you are real? We should not laugh. It's a real thing. It is not just the ANC ecosystem that is feeling the inevitable insecurity that comes with being unable to maintain freshness and relevance in changing times. The rest of the established political parties see themselves as the center of South Africa's future, yet they are unable to define an intellectual political project for the next phase of South African life. Service delivery is important, really important. But let's pause for a little. What kind of South Africa do we want? What kind of identity do we want to have? What kind of national value system do we want to have? Because it is in those questions that people act in a consistent way without political supervision. Whether people are in companies, they are in the church, they are in NGOs and so on. Everybody needs to believe in the same principles and work towards the same goals. You can't do that if we reduce our task to a series of technical interventions about service delivery or fixing ESCOM or fixing Transnet and so on. The reason people in those institutions pull in a million directions is because there is no sense of national purpose. People get in it for themselves. We have people in very powerful positions who are rooted in nothing. Usually they're rooted in money, in the love of money. And so as we have this conversation, let us have a discussion about these soft issues which apparently do not matter. They do. If we don't talk about them and make them a political project, we are going to be a lost country that wanders without purpose and achieves nothing. In many ways, the same political parties have the same problem as these old people, in that they cannot imagine a political vision and program that does not involve centering the ANC and all its sins. The ANC has to be the center of discussion. There is something you do, and I often have this conversation sometimes with white people about racism. And I say, deep down in our minds, racism exists insofar as there are white people around. Before there were white people around, we didn't talk racism. We spoke all sorts of things, right? And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that that which you center determines how well you are going to do in trying to realize your vision. So if we continue centering the ANC, we're going to base it on the negative, on that which we do not like, on that which has not worked. That's not a positive, self-propelling idea of the future. So earlier this year, John Steenhuisen carved our country's political landscape into a choice between a doomsday coalition between the EFF and the ANC on the one hand, and the DA and the rest of the GOAT parties on the other. Okay, I understand GOAT is not part of the multi-party coalition, so I have to be careful. Now, at a superficial level, one may see the logic, but this rhetoric does not represent a compelling vision of a new South African society. South Africa lacks a positive, standalone theory of change that charts a path for which we must fight. We must fight for which we must fight for. Please don't ask me, what are you going to do about XYZ? Say what should be done about it. I'm happy to answer that question. Words matter. When you ask me, what are you going to do about it, you place yourself on the sidelines. You do. Because you are going to sit there while some of us do the work. And I talk about people who are busy doing the work while we're sitting on the sidelines, and you are not going to like it. What is clear, though, is that voters want better, and in the absence of anything better, they vote with their feet, so they stay at home. They abstain from elections. In 2021, only 12 million out of 41 million eligible voters voted. Now, there are those who believe that is because there are too many political parties. If there's anyone here who is not voting because they are too confused to choose between many parties, then we need to have that conversation. But it cannot be a hypothetical, and please put up your hand. If it's because you are too confused, you look at that ballot paper and you don't know where to start, please put up your hand. There is this fallacy. People don't vote because they say, I cannot see anyone I should vote for, and you know it. People say that all the time. Which means until that alternative is born, they will continue not to have an option. And that is one of the reasons Rise Mzansi exists. Either the statement that says I don't have options is true, or it's false. But you can't say, I don't know who to vote for, and when there's another option, you say there are too many options. You can't have it both ways. You really can't have it both ways. No, we can't. We can't have it both ways. It comes from the place of self-imposed paralysis that I'm talking about. When you get an opportunity to turn right, you say, I want to turn left. When they say, okay, the door on the left hand is open, you go right, and you say the door is closed. It's an excuse to do nothing. And so we have chaotic political actors voted in by a minority of those who qualify to vote. Simply saying that combining political parties inherently produces political optimism is quite plainly a poor argument then. The reality is that at some level there is an element of being too afraid to explore new possibilities that can animate millions of people to believe once again in our democracy. When people don't vote, they've lost hope in democracy. So I talk to voters almost every day. They hate politics. They hate politicians. In Mannenberg, one guy said, he walked past as we were putting up posters, and he said, the only good politician is a dead one. He wasn't threatening, he carried on walking. So sensing a political malaise, there are some in business and in the 40s and 60s generation who have taken up an active role in trying to determine South Africa's political future. I do not blame them. Nature abhors a vacuum. Business responded in a similar fashion in the late 80s when the apartheid government was choking under the grip of its own decay and irrelevance. They sought out the ANC in exile to talk about the future. They are doing the same now, but with different actors. There are various schools of thought in this quiet battle for the control of South Africa's direction, the control of the future and the control of the state. Some advocate for a coalition between the DA and the ANC. Now, they're not advocating from the sidelines. There's actual lobbying of both parties' leaderships. This would make next year's elections an expensive academic exercise. But it would offer the kind of stability that is lacking in the scary coalition arrangements in the metros like the city of Johannesburg. Now, there are those in the ANC ecosystem who want the same, a coalition government with the DA on condition that the DA or its formative coalition is led by someone who's regarded as one of their own. So let me reflect on what this means. Because if between the DA and the ANC they agree on what to do, your vote and your shouting for this or that does not matter. It doesn't matter. The deal will have been struck. And that conversation is ongoing right now. Such a coalition would suit the establishment just fine, which is to turn the election into an academic exercise and produce a political outcome they will continue to dominate. Now people say they want change. You do not achieve change as a bystander. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that. Others see an opportunity to move the South African government thinking to the center-right, which is what a preferred parliamentary majority of their liking would enable. The only thing missing in that imagination is a black-led political party that would legitimize what is essentially a right-wing project. That black-led party of their choice does not exist currently. It may yet come. It may yet come very soon. Very, very soon. So you might wonder how we're navigating these political currents at play. So we engage with some of these people. And we offer a different analysis. Our analysis concludes that South Africa needs to move on from what is now a permanent transition that is hostage to the same generational cliques that agreed on the current political formula. There is nobody in those discussions who is the same age group as anyone in this room. They are shaping your future. As we know, that formula is fast losing legitimacy. The majority of voters don't vote, such as I said. The state is collapsing, and established political parties live in a world in which they believe deals between themselves amount to national consensus. Guys, look at the trade unions. COSATU is dead. It doesn't exist. It only exists in name. It is a rent-seeking organ that lives off whatever is left of the ANC. If you are a worker, you are on your own. These are people who live super luxurious lives, graduate to board appointments by the ANC government when they leave trade unions. These people look after each other. So we get thousands of protests every year. And anarchy stalks the land. Business forums, who are effectively extortion rings, not just in construction, but in other sectors of society. Crime keeps citizens in fear, the economy is collapsing, and state finances are so poor that we cannot even do the minimum needed to take the progressive rhetoric to make it seem possible. Emigration is no longer a white thing. Talented black professionals do what the post-colonial middle class did in post-colonial Africa, which is to emigrate to colonial capitals in Europe, in North America, when the post-colonial African state begins to fail. Many of you here know somebody who's in London, Canada, New York, or Australia. You do. That's how it started in Zim. That's how it started in Zim. We might not want to think about it that way, but it is true. You can call a meeting of 400 doctors and chartered accountants in London, and people would pitch up. South Africans, black. The country gets hollowed here, because that is what happens. That's a choice that you make, that instead of fighting for my country, I will leave it rather, because it is too difficult. I am too illegitimate to do anything. Many of us who do not emigrate seem to choose to be bystanders and commentators, because essentially we seem to believe that while the old has become stale, the new is not for us to drive. We do not want to shape a future South Africa, in our worldview. Such an environment is always ripe for a determined view to shape and control the outcome, to control the narrative, and to control national destiny. That process is currently underway. Once the political deal-making is done, everything else you get after that is like a buffet. You see, you might think you have choices in a buffet, but all you're ever gonna eat is the food that is on that table. If you want something else, you're not gonna get it. Drink water and sit down. Now, people complain about the same thing in the sense of 1994. It's happening again. It's happening again. See, Popichana was right earlier this year when he told students at the University of Free State that you, young South Africans, are the vanguard and custodians of our future. Yet, ironically, we are a society led by digital aliens, too old to grasp the language of this era and too slow to learn and take advantage of its offering, thereby condemning our societies to permanently lag the world in development. An impermissible squander of a rare human capital dividend. He continues, he says, paradoxically in our context, the old is not only the system of white domination that we thought was buried in 1994, but also the version of its successor as pursued by the ANC. After all, notwithstanding the new progressive ideology of the constitutional order and its transformative success, albeit limited, the death of the old has been so gradual that it is resulting in that past being present in the new. Hence the unaltered economic relations and the persistence of racism in our society. But the future of countries is hotly contested by those who care about national destiny and national purpose. We cannot afford to hang on to the coattails of either the ANC or established political parties because we are too afraid to seize the initiative to determine the future of our own country. We can no longer remain bystanders and let the future be shaped by coincidences. The time of being comfortable with being the chattering class, generating conversation about the acts of others must come to an end. No one is coming to save us. We are the ones we are waiting for. The length of that wait depends on how long we are prepared to still do nothing. If we continue to do nothing, we are going to wait a very long time. For this reason tonight, I tell you there's another way, a determined, positive way forward, a third way. So we have set out a bold vision of a safe, prosperous, equal and united South Africa within one generation. We have set out what we believe are the core national values that should anchor how we rebuild our country. We end poverty, reduce inequality, to end racism and the legacy of racism. Rise Mzansi will redefine the political center in South Africa, placing social democratic values and politics at the center of our national political thinking. Social democracy is the measure by which we should determine who is left-wing or right-wing. It sets a new moral purpose behind which we transform South Africa from a post-colonial compromise to a modern, just, equal African state. These values are freedom, equality, justice, solidarity, and integrity. They need to anchor what we do in politics, in business, in civil society, in sports, and so on. Doing such in all of society is an all of society mission, not just one political party or even political parties acting together. Let us tell each other some truths. The only sporting code that succeeds on the global stage is one that is uncontaminated by the decay of the ANC. We know it. Football has not escaped the ANC's decay. So countries with far less resources than we do much better at football on the global stage than we do. That is what leaving everything to these people and these old generations and the old thinking does. South Africa is the same as South African football. It is such a metaphor. The kids, the players, the black players that are in the Springbok squad, I think only Magazole Mapimpi is from the kind of schools that we went to. The others may have started there, but they went to white schools, which have school governing bodies, strong principals, involved parents, and so on, and lots of money from their alumni. So there is a cost to doing nothing. So as my fellow leader, Irfan, here, stated at our recent People's Convention, our pact, he said, is not about flying to any moon, nor will we compromise on political alliances before building an alliance with the societies we come from first. He said, we believe in the existence of social movements, civil society organizations, community builders, and the spirit of activism. We want more of that rather than less of it. Our politics is shaped by the deepening of democracy. We are not threatened by civic movements. We are shaped by them. We also know that these activists cannot be bought. They want to be engaged with care, solidarity, and authenticity. We know this because our entire journey has been shaped by them. We simply provided a platform for them to co-create a political movement. So Rise Mzansi says 2024 is our 1994, which is very popular with other political parties these days, and they hashtag it. We trademarked it, by the way, but we let it slide. We just let it slide. We've got other things to do. What that means in the outcome, what that means is that in the outcome, it will depend on whether we surrender the social and political transformation initiative to the establishment or we stand up to seize the initiative. But we cannot facilitate a situation where our children and their children accuse us, as we accuse Mandela and others, of selling out their future because we were too conservative, too careful, too afraid to do anything to secure the future they deserve. Our country is in terminal decline. We must be very careful of wanting renewal while we surrender the initiative to those we also accuse of not caring enough about us, our well-being, or the future of our children. So, in closing, I want to make just a few points. That South Africa is in a search for the perfect rocket science solution. What's your solution on this going to be? What's your solution on that going to be? We have a problem of leadership in South Africa. Amen. That's a problem that we have. People who make honest, well-considered choices, appoint the right people to the right roles in the national interest. To this day, Eskom still does not have a chief executive who's permanent. And because the FD is acting chief executive, it also means it does not have an FD. We are in stage what today? So the organization is decapitated. We're in stage 6. Well, we might be in stage 7 by the time we leave here. Guys, there is no magic solution to poor leadership. When people do not show appetite for strong, clear-headed, and ethical leadership, the only thing you do is to remove them. There is no other way. You know, before 1994, I was in the PAC. And one of the first things I was taught was that freedom is never handed over to the oppressed by the oppressor. The oppressed have to take it by any means necessary. We don't want to do that, let's be honest. We don't want to do that. The formulation of the questions we ask people like myself who've decided to do something says we want to stand on the sidelines. What are you going to do about it? So some key reform priorities we've spoken about as Rise Mzansi. Quickly. The first one is political reform. This democracy is such as it is because the formula was to secure the peace and make sure that racial minorities get represented in parliament. It does not work anymore. We need to change it. We need to change it. Parliament is powerless in the face of the executive because the people who fire and appoint MPs are the same people that MPs are supposed to oversee. Now, if some of you work for companies, imagine if the entire board was appointed by the chief executive. What do you think is going to happen? But that's a situation we have. So that's got to change. All the people who don't know what they're doing, some of them know what they're doing, but they are corrupt. Some of them are exceptionally talented, but work for people who don't have good intentions. I often feel terrible for public servants who are highly educated and highly committed, but work for bad apples. That's a political problem. There is no magic solution that you can ask any political party how they're going to solve it. There is none. So changing the entire state, parliament, the executive, and the judiciary is important. The second is, South Africa is unsafe. There is not a single woman here, I think, who feels comfortable stepping out here and walking over to the mark right now along the street. Maybe some of you have karate and things, maybe you can, but I don't think so. South Africa is an unsafe place. The fundamental role of any government is to keep its citizens safe. But we are unsafe in all sorts of ways, including not being safe on the roads. The third one is economic inclusion and justice. And economic growth, economic inclusion, and economic justice. But I just want to say one thing, two things very quickly, JJ. I'm going to sit down just now. The first is, you can't build on an economy in the face of political decay and collapse. You can't. So the Reserve Bank governor, once again, for the 188th time probably, said Eskom and Transnet are choking the South African economy. Until you solve that problem, you're going nowhere. Municipalities are dying. Every business is in a municipality, every single one. So you tell me, come up with sharp economic policy to situate it where? In Joburg, with this guy in charge. Guys, let's be serious though. Let's be serious though. So what am I trying to say? Is that talking about political reform and governance and all of these things is a matter of economic imperative. Because you cannot deliver economic justice in the face of collapse. Kids who do not have enough food to eat and suffer from stunting will never pass matric, and no youth employment scheme will save them. There is no smart solution about beneficiation and so on for high skills. In the Eastern Cape, 27% of kids suffer from stunting, 27%. 48% of all kids who start school never finish. So how do you do economic inclusion in that environment? Let's get the basics right. Let's wait with the clever stuff. But the basics are difficult because they involve politics and political contestation, the thing we do not want to do, most of us. Then we need to fight this corruption thing. We need to fight this corruption thing. You cannot reform a corrupt person. You can't. They must go. Attached to each corrupt person is an ecosystem of business people and others hangers on who benefit off the corruption. And until you remove the nucleus of the corrupt ecosystem, there is nothing you will do in the economy, in fighting crime, or anywhere else. The cops are captured by criminals. We need a purge of bad elements. That's a political task. Finally, climate change. And I'm going to make a statement here, which is this conversation about whether the just transition conversation, about whether we should move into coal or not. Let me tell you what this is. I used to work in mining. There's a saying in mining, good mines are bought, not sold. If someone is flogging you a mine, there's something wrong with it. And so the coal mines got sold to black people because globally, the attitude towards fossil fuels was changing. And so what happens? As soon as the darkies start owning these assets, the rules change globally. And there is a just transition conversation. And so you've got a contestation between rich elites who are in coal and in renewable mining, and they in renewable energy. And they want to involve us in that fight. But if you live on those hills in KZN when it rains and your home gets swept away, you frankly don't give a damn about a just transition. But those are the conversations we choose to have as people with the means to understand. So we choose the elite conversation. people who used to plant their maize in October, like they do in my village and where I come from. They can't plant in October anymore. They can't tend the soil in September anymore. It takes longer to rain, and when it does, it rains too much, and it's supposed to be warm. It's cold as hell in summer. And so the stems are thin and yellow like this, and it affects food security. That's part of the reason why the hunger has increased in the rural areas of the Eastern Cape. That's the climate crisis. But we choose to have a different conversation on our smartphones. I'm just asking us to care. None of us who are involved in Rise Zansi generally didn't have options in terms of where we can go. This is not a nice task. We don't get paid the way we got paid in our jobs to do it. We have to go around begging for money all the time from people who say you must be part of the establishment and get involved in the deal making so that we can give you money. You've heard them calling my name on TV. Refusing to do so comes with financial costs. What I'm trying to say, guys, in closing, and JJ, is that buffet of the kind of future you are going to have is being prepared. You are neither the chef nor have any cook in the kitchen. When it gets offered, you will have to take it. The decision all of us must choose is whether we want to get involved in deciding that menu or not. And it's not just my job. It's not just Vuiswa's job. It's not just Makashule Ghana's job. It's all of our jobs. Let us get rid of the self-imposed paralysis. South Africa is ours to take and to shape. But whether it will be ours or not will depend on how much we are willing to sacrifice. Thank you.
I hope you're not referring to our dinner. I mean, you referred a lot to the buffet. And we are going to serve a buffet, by the way. The only difference that you don't have to queue. The buffet will come to you.
Okay.
Will that
so
be
each table will have its own buffet. Okay. No, that's fine, JJ.
The microphone is misbehaving already. Typical, it's like a parastatal microphone. I want us to start to talk about political realignment.
Yes.
Because you spend so much time, you've answered half of the things I wanted to ask. So I'm going to spend more time on a few practical things to say there's a broad framework you have put that sounds very impressive, but what does it mean for certain things that are a worry to South Africans? And I'll come to that now, like jobs, empowerment, etc. But before I get there, let's talk about political alignment. I was quite worried about what you said, that there's a deal in the cooking between the DA and the ANC. Remember, the ANC actually denied. You remember what Paul Mashatile hosted at the University of the Western Cape, where the other parties were saying, hey, we hear there's a deal here. They denied flat to say there's no deal, and so on. So just shed a light on that. Would that be a bad thing necessarily, that parties on either extreme of the spectrum come together to say, let's have some kind of a government of national unity type of thing? I'm trying to find a silver lining here about that kind of potential, stew that's being cooked there.
No, so let me explain it this way. You see, our country is in chaos, right? It truly is politically. And voters do vote with their feet and they stay off the polls, right? Mm. And people in the different sectors of South African society, in business, in the church, some of them, some senior church people are really worried by the things they see in Tshwane and they see in the city of Joburg and so on. Because it says the future is going to be chaotic. Now imagine if you have to change finance minister 4 times in one term because somebody decided to just leave the coalition. So what I'm trying to say is these kind of things are not necessarily evil. right? They're not evil. But it is in the chaos that people with powerful interests in South Africa decide, we can't leave this to chance.
Yeah.
We cannot leave this to chance. We have to try and make sure that this ship is stable.
Yeah.
The problem is when that kind of deal making happens, it doesn't happen through the ballot. It happens before the ballot. And by the time you rock up at the election, the deal is done. Right? It is merely to determine who is going to dish out the buffet. Right? What I'm trying to say is that it is important that we do not become distracted people. A, we don't know this is going on. Secondly, even when we know it's going on, we do not put ourselves in a position where we can have a say in the outcome. Right? Because you need to have a say in the outcome. Now, if you're not in parliament, you don't get to make laws. Some of those people make laws, and then people say, yeah, but this legislation doesn't do what we want. Well, the principles were agreed before the election. You were not there. So that's all I'm saying, JJ, to say that countries are contested. The future and destiny of countries is contested.
Yeah.
When you have people, the majority of people being distracted and believing they can't do anything, the few will determine the outcome in their own interest.
Yeah.
Mostly because there was nobody in the room to represent your interest. If you remember, when the moonshot thing started in the East Rand, the other opposition parties insisted that the DA must say they will not work with the ANC. You remember?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They didn't say that at random, ne? They didn't say that at random.
So
there was a reason.
has that ship not sailed because they committed themselves to say, we'll never work with the ANC, we'll never work with the EFF in order to create this block ahead of voting?
No,
Are you saying they're going to pull out of that?
No, I'm not saying that they're going to pull out of that. What I'm trying to say is that there is a contestation. And if you remember, I mentioned two schools of thought. The one school of thought says, just combine the ANC and the DA.
Yeah.
And make sure that between the two of them, they've got over 60%, even a 2/3 basically. Then we don't have to worry about the EFF and all of these guys. Then we all happy and everything continues as it is, right? That's one school of thought. There are people who say we must never ever see the ANC anywhere near the union buildings.
Yeah.
But in order to get there, we need a black party or a black face to sit atop of the moonshot.
That's why the moonshot, whatever they call themselves now, agreed that it doesn't mean if we have more votes, you'll be president.
Yeah.
They were basically saying John Steenhuisen must understand he won't be president even if the DA is number one.
If they were to be honest, and Peter Groenewald said it in the Sunday Times. He wrote a long op-ed and he said, South Africa needs a black president. The question is who? Peter Bruce writes, but maybe it should be Velengosini Hlabisa and so on.
Yeah.
The election is next year, even maybe in August or July, right? That conversation is taking place now. So what I'm telling you is not necessarily secret, right? It's just that we must not believe that it's only political parties who are involved in the discussion.
But clearly the DA doesn't think that South Africa needs a black president.
I can't speak for them.
They clearly don't think so because they could have elected one.
Well,
by now. Tell me now, let's before I move on to more practical things, but let's talk about political realignment. 400 parties. Tons of independents. You haven't even mentioned independents once today.
Yeah.
I think you were discouraged by the dog's breakfast, that is the Electoral Act.
Yeah.
Right? So let's assume at least 200 of these independents get in and then 200 fractured parties and so on. It all looks too fractured. And it's my theory that this fracture may just get the ANC to be back into power by default. What's your view about that?
JJ, how many political parties are represented in parliament actually?
Maybe 19?
Like 14 political parties. Let us not engage in hyperbole and say
400.
because there are 400 political parties on the books. The South African ballot has never had more than 20 political parties on the ballot, or 30, whatever the case might be. So the number always narrows. What is clear is that as many as they are, most people simply don't decide to vote, JJ. So let us say you were to combine the 10 political parties into one, right? Do you think they would form a majority? No.
It doesn't follow.
It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
They wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
The reason is voters would still not find them attractive, right? We honestly have to ask the question of what does the South African voter really want? Why are they not voting? What is the problem?
Yeah.
Right? And then we must answer that question. And that's what we've tried to answer, JJ. I do not think we are going to have a lot of independence. This Electoral Act is a scam.
Yeah.
It is designed to ensure that there are no independents, one. Secondly, the ANC knows they'll get below 50%. So this amendment, this act that they are trying to push through, says in part, the party with the biggest block of votes must be in government by necessity. So in other words, if they get 40%, they must be in government, even if the parties that get 60% together want to form a different government.
So you can't form a minority government.
You can't form a minority government. Come on. I mean, there's no way where that happens. It's crazy. So what I'm trying to say is all these machinations to fix the future and what it's going to look like are carrying on a lot of the time in the public domain. But we generally, we're not paying enough attention. We're worried by load shedding and high cost of living and how to feed our kids and so on. But this stuff is also important.
You're talking about a new intellectual project. And you are saying to me, in all these parties, the EFF, the Action SA, I'm talking about the ones that matter a little bit, right? PA. There's none at all where you could have said there is a potential partner for a possible bloc because the trends, and I'm sure you are an optimist like me, and you won't be determined, won't be determined by the trends, If I went according to the trends, I wouldn't be on television. I'll be taken off immediately. Say, hey, stop making noise. That's not how TV is done. So I understand that you don't have to follow the trends.
Yeah.
But the trends are poor in all the parties. You start PAC, poor, one seat. COPE, -1 seat. I shouldn't be saying that.
JJ.
Lukona here will be very angry with me. He used to be coping with me, and then EFF just a splatter in the wind. They did differently from all the others. So maybe there could be an exception. But if you look at all the others, it's been something that sparks hope because clearly South Africans need something new. They just haven't figured out what it is, right? So, given that it's possible that you can, trigger an interest, but not enough to be 51, we are going to be looking at coalitions. You have to level with me about, while you want this new intellectual project, there must be someone in these parties where you say, that one is a no, this one is a yes. Can you venture into that?
So, JJ, let's talk about the importance of what I've called a political intellectual project, right? And that's because we tend to discuss politics in transactional terms, right? Tessa here asked a question about national identity. Who do we want to be? How does a South African show up in South Africa and in the world?
So where's Tessa?
Not the Tessa, another Tessa. Remember when, in the beginning, when people were saying what their expectations are, right? Now, JJ, this is a very important conversation. So at the convention, by the way, one of the themes we were discussing is nation building. It was one of the most popular. And people were discussing this very question. The South African identity, the meaning of non-racialism. And so on. What kind of people do we want to be? People very quickly try to hurry you up to go and join a coalition with somebody you ideologically agree with or whatever the case may be. So it was important for Rise Mzansi to do this work.
Independently first.
Independently. Because there is a reality that we will be in coalition government next year. Right? How do you define what you're going to stand for? If the first step you take, even before you've had a convention, you're trying to form a moonshot coalition with somebody else. Come on. What do you say you want out of that coalition? You have to work that out first, right? So we're not being obstinate and saying we don't want to work with other political parties. The last thing I want to say, JJ, is it is a fallacy, by the way, to say in order to be in coalition with a political party, with any political party, you have to ideologically agree with them. Europe is littered with coalition governments. Every political party fights for its own position to the max until election time. And then they get a time window to form a coalition government. What is being done here is that the elites are saying, no, you make a choice now before the election. But come on, if we already agree, JJ, as 5 parties, how do voters know who to pick?
Exactly. So can I just challenge you there then to say that because there are so many parties that are promising almost the same thing, almost, I'm very careful here.
Yes.
In terms of saying we need a change, right? Voters are sitting saying, but is Action SA, Mashawa sounds fine on an odd day, on another day sounds terrible. But maybe generally I should go for him because he's been a mayor of Joburg for two minutes. Maybe he knows something, you know. And this one has not been a mayor. So now let's just be frank here and talk about EFF.
Yes.
Right? I want to talk about EFF, DA, and Action SA and PA.
Yes.
Tell me what makes you unsettled about any of them in terms of, right, working with them should the need arise after the election, and they are the ones who are easy to talk to. Let's start with EFF. Is something so radically wrong with what they are pushing from a point of view of transforming this society that you think that is not something that we should align with?
So, JJ, the things that break coalitions are not even the ideological issues. For instance, can I trust you to stick to a deal with me in a coalition for 5 years or not? Or are you going to flip-flop? You want the ANC out now, but you're now in with the ANC after 2 years. It's a relationship, right? Isn't that question important about whether I can trust you to stick with me for 5 years?
But you remember what that person in Cape Town said about politicians. It looks like you are looking in the wrong pond.
No.
You want somebody you can trust.
What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say, JJ. Let us take the EFF.
Yeah.
And the number of times they flip from one partner to the next in no time, right? Now you are the one who's looking for a partner. Which one are you gonna go for first? The one who flips out of your arrangement into the other guy that you both said you don't like, or the one who is consistent in keeping a deal together? That's an example.
Good company. I mean, look at the DA. The DA not so long ago was in coalition with the EF. It doesn't matter how they defined it.
Yes, they were in coalition, by the way.
They did a policy statement saying they are enemy number one. So that could also be called flip-flop, right? Look at PA. PA has flip-flopped from the coalition with the DA. And now they said, we're not going to work with them anymore.
Yes.
So it looks like you're going to look very hard to find a consistent partner.
Oh yeah, JJ, that's going to be very difficult. Let me tell you what's important to us in terms of what you do in a coalition arrangement. We are working on our manifesto right now. We'll publish it on the 20th of January. So we've got a declaration now that came out of our convention. We'll have a manifesto on the 20th of January. Then soon after, we'll produce a national plan. So you've got your manifesto which says, what am I going to fix? Then you need to say how, basically. I believe that at that point, it is possible to realistically get into conversations with people because you can name the pound of flesh that you want. And say, if you are prepared to work with us on these priorities, then we might have a deal, right? So I'm not running away from the question, JJ, but there are other principles that are important. We have said, for instance, we assert South Africa's constitutional values.
Yes.
Right? We assert South Africa's constitutional values. So, for instance, if you don't believe that there should be, gay South Africans should be able to get married, it's clearly a very deep problem of principle, as an example. And it's going to be very difficult because we can't legislate together. You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to say is that let us not be too captured by this conversation of who you will never, ever work with, ever, right? And we haven't even won a single seat yet, and you want me to make that declaration.
But isn't it a strategic mistake for the DA to say we don't want to work with the EFF even before they know how the EFF will perform? Because according to the latest poll, actually they are neck to neck with the EFF now in terms of being the official opposition?
Well, those two parties have had experience of being in a relationship together, and maybe it was too hot in the bedroom for the two of them. So,
Okay, before I move off this subject, you have to tell me about Action SA.
Yes.
It seems quite a decent bunch.
No, Action SA, by the way, have done really well, right? I mean, in the 2021 elections, I think they got 6% of the vote, if I'm not mistaken. And they started from scratch, basically. I think what we must encourage as South Africans, and earlier on, I spoke about the importance of moving on from old political parties, right? And it's important that the menu that is available to South Africans is increasingly new, is increasingly responsive to the issues of the day, right? That South Africans feel are really important to them. And in our conversation, we'll talk to some of the policy issues we believe are really important, but are hardly given any attention. And so I'm not a person who would say, I don't want new political parties. We are one ourselves. Because they are
Any of them try to recruit you?
Yeah, no, look, personally, yes. Actually, I say, Herman asked me.
You refused Herman?
I did, yeah.
He's a big charmer. He didn't put a big
I did.
incentive on the table.
I'm a social democrat at heart. I have certain views about the future of South Africa and the values and so on, and we didn't share them.
You didn't share them?
No.
Yeah, pity. But let's talk about 2 or 3 practical things before we go to the buffet you've been talking about. Are you hungry? Because you've been talking about buffet the whole evening.
And I was too nervous. I didn't even have a starter, yeah.
All right. I think the dinner will come in about 10 minutes and they can start serving it. But let's do 2 things, and then after dinner we'll carry on.
Yes.
And we just get into the audience and get people to engage with you.
Yes.
Let's start with unemployment.
Yes.
Big crisis. Actually,
Massive.
a time bomb.
Yes.
Right? Now, I understand that you say that no political party can come with a magic wand, etc. I appreciate that.
Yes.
But in an election, people want to feel that there's somebody who's giving them a hope on an issue that is killing them at the moment. So let's talk about unemployment. How are you going to turn that corner when, in fact, it looks like there's a reversal of gains?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of even a gain, there were 2 jobs here, then they retrench. I was talking to the premier of Gauteng.
And he's been retrenched?
No, it's not been retrenched yet. We can retrench him in May. But the issue is that he says nurses ban, there's 16,000 posts, right?
Yeah.
And then they retrench nurses in Karangu Hospital. I don't know what it's called, Mukari Hospital.
Yes.
So I said, but is that not now reversing? You saying there are posts, one hand gives nurses span, the other hand takes away the span. How are you going to make sure that there's no revolving door around employment? Let's deal with that before I come to empowerment.
Sure, JJ. So, JJ, that's not a real employment scheme, by the way. It's an election gimmick that Panyaza is doing.
Come on, he's trying. Those posts were empty posts that were not filled.
Sure, JJ.
Surely.
Sure, JJ. It's an election gimmick. It's the same as Ama Panyaza, by the way.
Sure.
No, it is the same.
I thought the guy's trying, man.
No, JJ, come on. Let's get serious, right? Because if you are serious about creating employment in a country, you really have to do it in a way that takes account of everybody's need, right? You give somebody a job, you deprive them of health care on the other hand. There's clearly something that you're doing wrong, right? One of the most common complaints we get, and we go to rural communities and the like, South Africans over the age of 35 are told that they are too old to get jobs in the expanded public works program and so on. Now, if you are 35, typically these people are women, and women have the burden of care for children. Right? What is the intention? I know youth unemployment is high, but it also happens to be the numerically highest demographic for an election, right? So it's not a genuine attempt to solve a very serious problem, because when you say to somebody who's 35, who's more likely to have kids, by the time they're 35, 1, 2, or 3 kids, or however many, right? You stand at the back of the queue because you're starting with the 21-year-olds. That's not a genuine solution. It's a cynical intervention, right? This comes up all the time. So let's talk about the nature of unemployment. So who is unemployed in South Africa? 90% of unemployed people in South Africa either just have matric or have no matric at all. The people are unemployed. And I'm going to talk about why integrated solutions for these kind of problems are important. Out of those who don't have matric, remember I said only 48% of kids who begin school finish. So they get no training and so on and so forth, right? And then we call them amapara, etc., etc. But, and this is not an insult, we are not helping them to become employable.
Yeah.
Because they have no skills. They don't even have matric. Many are in rural areas or informal communities and so on, right? So when you genuinely want to solve the unemployment problem and solve the related problems such as hunger, you put in place a combination of interventions. We believe at Rights Mzansi, the number one problem we must solve is actually hunger. Because even the people who are looking for work, it is impossible to look for work on an empty stomach. There must be state transfers, subsidies for food or food stamps or whatever, for certain brands to be available at a discount at the shops and that sort of thing, so that people can put food on the table, right? That's one example of how you begin to improve the dignity of people. The second thing is we must make training opportunities, whether they're for short-term employment and so on, available to people who do not have matric. It's not even a case of saying you must finish matric first. Let's make that possible for them while we feed them. By the way, so that is the second thing you do. Definitely everybody who has matric must be able to get training within a year of finishing matric. And that must be provided by the government or through a government intervention. Now you've made people employable. But I'm going to mention two interventions which are seemingly not related to the economy but are important. The first one, JJ, is that we need to look at how we budget and how we allocate funds and what those are for. If you were to ask me whether we should rescue SOC 1 or 2 or 3, which are not necessarily critical to the functioning of the South African economy, Eskom is important, Transnet is important to me, SAA is not. Where do I want to put 20 billion a year in? I want to put 20 billion a year in terms of creating employment or making people employable. Where? At matric level and so on, so that people can become employable. The second thing that you do, JJ, it might seem like it's not important. If we were to fix municipal governance, and I know it's complicated in our system, municipal governance and drive infrastructure investment at a local level would create a lot more jobs. JJ, I come from a village. If every home in a village was to have pipe water into the property, now it's possible to become a plumber in Mqanduli. Because people are going to do things inside their homes, sanitation and so on, as an example. But we can't do that because there's only one communal tap in my village and the pressure is not even half of what it needs to be, right? So what I'm trying to say, these things are not difficult. Lastly, JJ, I make this example all the time. Let us say you fix the road between Vigisville on the N2 and Coffee Bay and the Haven and the Mtata River mouth and so on in the Eastern Cape. The economic investment you would get in the Wild Coast because you've done that is enormous. And people would stop moving from Kanduli to live in a shack in Port Elizabeth in Cape Town without matric. And when it rains, their shack gets flooded. And then we say, oh no, just build houses there. We're forcing people to run away from where they're rooted, to leave their families and kids behind, to look for work they're not going to find. So what I'm trying to say, JJ, is the things we have to do to fix this economy and create employment, unfortunately, need leadership and political change so that you make different political choices.
You're on Frank Dialogue. We're talking to SONGEZO ZIBI. If you are following us on YouTube of the Frank Dialogue or on Times Live, you're welcome. Please do send us your comments. You can tweet on hashtag Frank Dialogue or hashtag Rise Mzansi on FD if you want us to take some of your questions online. Of course, we also welcome listeners from Kasi FM as well as Kofifi FM, partners in Frank Dialogue on your radio, joining us also to just broaden the dialogue to make sure people at home can also follow. Black economic empowerment, big issue.
Yes.
I'm sure I sound repetitive because I interviewed too many times. I hope you've reached your quota now. This will be the last interview before the elections.
Yes.
But let's repeat that one. Black economic empowerment, is it as a principle, a policy that's all that bad? Or is it about how poorly it has been either denigrated, abused, or just ignored, largely by business, and not implemented by government? Can you help me there, whether a Rise Zansi government will just scrap the whole thing, or you have an alternative policy, or you'll just say, no, let's implement it?
No, JJ, we need more and better black economic empowerment, by the way. The first point of disempowerment is when we allow kids not to finish matric. And maybe allow is not the right word. We create conditions in which they are not able to finish matric. Right?
Well, our kids can't read or write according to global statistics.
And I know people get upset and there are steps to this, but we must be honest. So I don't know about you, but I have people in my family who did not finish matric. Okay? And they struggle to find work. I'm not saying people here can't get promoted because they're not educated. People get upset about this answer. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying there are millions of South Africans who are simply not able to get into a position where they can even benefit from the empowerment legislation, like affirmative action and so on, because they're not even in a job. We have to understand the first step of black economic empowerment as being black economic inclusion. That is step one of black economic empowerment. You have to be in the room first, and then you can get empowered. We're leaving them outside the room. So that is the first thing, right? The second thing, and we spoke about the training and all the rest of it, so I'm not going to repeat that. The second thing is that we need to start making certain choices, JJ. I believe that it is a waste of capital and a waste of energy to try and find billions in PIC money and so on, so that somebody can get 2% of some company, some white-owned company. And then we say we've got a few black people who are eating on our behalf in that company, and therefore we're fine. I think we need to think about using a lot of that money for 100% black-owned and woman-owned businesses. Because you need to make people owners of economic assets. 100% owners of economic assets. Not bit players in spaces that are owned by other people.
But is it either or?
No, it's not either or.
Shouldn't be
and I'm coming to the big companies. JJ, unions and pension funds, worker pension funds and all of these people have billions. If you want a chunk of a large successful company or discovery, whatever the case is, the unions must part own those companies. They must part own those companies and appoint people to the board and co-determine the strategy of that company and the decisions that get taken. But we don't want to be that focused about this. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be an ownership of broad-based ownership of assets in that way. I'm saying sometimes we do the same thing we do with climate change, and that is to have a conversation that only takes care of the interests of the elites. And we must not do that.
But don't you think the elites have sort of ignored black economic empowerment to a point where it's a bit of a frustration? In that, if you look at just employment equity, the reports are horrendous. I mean, the latest report by the Department of Labor, and it's a similar report that came out by KPMG 10 years before, that almost 70% of all new appointments and all new promotions are to white people, even after affirmative action, employment equity, and all of that, which means that they are just laughing to say these guys, they've passed a law, but they can't implement it. Is a Rise Zansi government going to let them be, or you're going to be saying, while we are planting a seed for blacks to own their own business, etc., we can't have a lily-white business that ignores 1994, and they are going to ignore your 2024?
No, JJ, I mean, I didn't say that we need to get rid of anything. I'm just saying how we think of how we drive black economic empowerment has got to be comprehensive, first of all, and take care particularly of the people who have nothing. Right? So that's the first point I'm making. The second point, JJ, is, like I said, is that we need to make different choices about where to deploy capital. The issue of transformation, by the way, at the level of affirmative action is interesting. So I've worked for companies all my life. I've never worked in the public sector. I've worked for companies all my life. There are two trends that I've noted and experienced in my life, or three, in my professional life. The first is that the belief that simply appointing a black person to an executive position is necessarily on its own transformative is a fallacy. It's a fallacy. And we know it. And so this habit of twerking and getting upset when someone who has never looked after the interests of black people at work is seemingly denied an opportunity needs to stop. Because we need to look for people who have a transformative mindset and transformative attitude. I will take a white guy who's got a track record of promoting black women before a black guy who's got a track record of not promoting black people. So we mess this thing ourselves with mindless racial solidarity rather than looking at the results. That's the first thing. The second thing, women systematically get paid less than men in the workplace. We tend to tell women that they need to wait until the black men are at the top table of white people before we look at your exclusion from promotion in the workplace. We don't put it like that, but there is an unsaid agreement between white men and black men. And we know it is true. So when I was working at the bank, when I arrived there, we started an initiative to equalize pay between men and women. It took 3 years. People not getting paid equal pay for equal work, but what we do, we only racialize the thing. Right? So that's the second thing. So we need to think about women as a matter of course. And the last thing I want to say, to your statistic, JJ, I actually think the problem is this. I think the appointments you're talking about are C-suite appointments. Companies are not short of black and woman middle managers, ne? They are not short of those people. It's the thing at the top there that is a problem. And that is a problem that we need to solve, JJ. But like I said, I would much sooner hire a white person with a transformative mindset than a black person who's going to get there and they're gone.
Or the one who are going to close the door. They're saying I'm the only black person in the room.
They kick the ladder once they get
but
there.
let's talk about the financial sector. Especially given what's been happening the last couple of days with banks being found with their hands in the cookie jar, to put it bluntly.
Aunt is laughing at me.
Right? And you used to work for one of them.
Yes.
But I won't hold that against you now. Right? The financial sector is the most untransformed. But what's interesting is that if you remember during that era of charters and BE charters and when targets were being set, they were the lowest target. They were given 10% to transfer to black hands in 5 or 10 years or something. I don't remember the length. But when the codes, because it's 20 years of BE now, when the codes were first introduced, they were given like the first round to say in 10 years you must be at 10%. I think they are not even at 6% after 20 years. Right? Now, here's the trick. Because our empowerment model has to do with vendor financing, loans, making people indebted and what. It means that actually they are holding the purse strings for transformation. Yet they themselves are not transforming, which means that basically we must forget. Is there something in your view that can be done to trigger the financial sector to do better, right? In terms of supporting SMMEs, supporting these black businesses you're talking about that we can establish from scratch, etc. Let's not talk about their collusion and so on. It's not going to help us tonight. Let's just talk about their, doing something that actually should be a business imperative for them to uplift the majority of the population who are their customers.
So JJ, let me start here. So you remember during the pandemic, right? That there was a so-called 500 billion rand stimulus package. So that thing was a little bit of financial trickery. There was no 500 billion on the table, actually. Right? And I saw lots of people twerking and saying the money was stolen. It really wasn't. It was never on the table to begin with. But there is an important lesson to that intervention, JJ, okay? So, and I don't want to give too long an answer, but this is really important, and I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I can, right? One of the reasons in 2008, the South African banking sector remained robust when the global financial system was collapsing is because of the banking sector's strict lending criteria. Okay, it's because of the banking sector's strict lending criteria. If you have time, please look at the annual results of any bank. There is something called a credit loss ratio in the financial results. It is all the loans that the bank has had to write off because somebody's business went under, they don't have any assets, and so they're never going to recover that money, or somebody got retrenched and so on, all those kind of things. It's a credit loss ratio. Now, it needs to stay at a certain level. You don't want a credit loss ratio that is like 10% or 12%. That's a problem, right? So what the Reserve Bank and the Finance Ministry and the government do the last bit of info is that banks have to deposit actual cash with the Reserve Bank.
Yes.
Right? So there are liquidity reserves. They're called liquidity reserves. It's hundreds of billions of rand that get deposited in the Reserve Bank so that if that bank gets into trouble, right? If that bank gets into trouble, its own shareholders' money can be used to rescue that bank and not taxpayers, right? So that's the logic of it. Okay. What the government does to simplify during the pandemic is to say, okay, we will give you back some of this money that is being kept by the Reserve Bank so that you can extend loans and have favorable credit terms and so on so that businesses can remain open. One of the solutions that can be put in place, JJ, is to give banks an allowance of X percentage of its own liquidity reserves to be used specifically to lend to black businesses, right? So it's money that is there. You simply say, we take some of this money, let's say combined it's going to be 100 billion rand.
So you don't want to nationalize banks?
You don't have to. JJ, you do not want to own a bank. Believe me. Believe me. I know it seems sexy. You do not want to own a bank because
I'm part of a cooperative bank. Is it a good idea?
JJ, you don't want to own a bank because the problem with a bank, by the way, there is always about 30-40% of the money that all of you have deposited in a bank available at any given point in time.
Yeah.
Right? The rest of it has been given back to you, lent back to you as car loans, as home loans, as short-term loans, and that kind of thing. The actuaries at the bank have to make sure that you are able to pay that money back so that client, when he goes to the ATM, he can get his money.
Yeah.
If all of you were to say you want all your money out of the ATM in one day, the bank would collapse.
Yeah.
Right? So that is why all of these instruments are there. I know we want to have easy solutions. Unfortunately, JJ, there are no easy solutions.
I know there are no easy solutions, but we need to go and eat now. So I'm going to ask you a couple of yes or no questions.
Oh.
That's okay. You can elaborate later.
That I will elaborate later.
Is Rice Zansi going to redistribute the land?
Oh, yes. In fact, JJ, to be specific, we believe every South African, when they reach the age of 21, must get a piece of land that they have not paid for.
Okay. But I don't think it's what you said the last time I interviewed you. But that's okay. Maybe I don't remember.
Take notes. This is a problem. You're not taking notes even now.
Okay, next question. Migration. PA.
Yeah.
No, not the Prudential Authority now this time. I don't want to be confused because we've been talking about money.
Not a personal assistant.
Patriotic Alliance says they will do mass deportation of foreigners. It sounds like a big election issue where everybody's jumping onto the bandwagon. Let's say SONGEZO ZIBI is president tomorrow, right? And you have a window of a legislative window where you can persuade Parliament to pass a law around migration. What would that be quickly? Would you deport illegal immigrants in a mass deportation frenzy? Or will you open the borders like the EFF?
No, the first thing you do, JJ, is to secure the borders.
Or secure them, not open them?
No, you got to secure them. JJ, we used to deport people out of Lindela, right? And they would come back on Monday. No, they would. Or they would hand themselves over in December so they can get a free ride home and come back in January, right? So secure the borders, first of all.
Yeah.
Deal with the corruption at Home Affairs. Regularize everybody who's here already. What does that mean? You need to get the right papers. You've got 6 months to get the right papers. If you need to apply for a work permit, apply for a work permit.
Yeah.
If you need to apply for
So you won't
asylum,
bother with
apply for-
deportation?
No, hang on. Apply for asylum. But if you don't qualify for any of these things, you need to go home. The beauty of securing the borders is because you've now secured them. So that person has to apply and reapply from back home, right?
Yeah.
We've got a problem of a government that is weak and cannot police the borders or implement immigration, is
Yeah.
too corrupt and so on. That's a problem.
Okay, last question before you go and have dinner. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have a chance now after dinner. And I would like you during dinner to now sort of digest not just the food, but what he said here. And then we're going to come to each of your tables now to see what discussions have been going through dinner. So we'll say in 15 minutes time, so we'll give you time to digest and eat now. I think I should also release you to eat. But once you finish eating, come back here and sit here. I will go here with Jessica to get people, and then we'll throw back to you for some answers and questions.
Thank you, JJ.
How will you fix Transnet? Quickly. We have a queue of trucks as we speak now. 25 days to offload SONGEZO. I mean, it's a disaster.
3 things, JJ. 1, get rid of the mafias that are actually making it impossible for Transnet to operate.
Okay.
Right? The people whose trucks would not make money for them if the railway system was operating are busy.
Yeah.
And they're not doing nice things.
Yeah.
So that is the first thing that you do. The second thing that you do, you need to put the right leadership, board and management at ESCOM. Andile Sango was my boss, is a good guy, I'm not saying it's a bad apple.
Yeah.
But Transnet also does not have leadership, by the way.
Yeah.
Does not have a chief executive, no FD and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So that's the second thing you do. The third thing I want to propose here. So Transnet needs, they said how much, JJ? Can you remember?
They said 10 billion.
How much did they say,
to
Clan?
rescue them?
It's too much money. I think it's 100 billion.
100 billion.
It's
not
100 billion. The
Yeah.
government does not have 100 billion. So here's a proposition that we can discuss after. The South African government owns all the roads. It does not own all the cars and the trucks on the road, right? Why should the South African government own both the railway and the locomotives when it has no money? Could we possibly, through largely local investment by pension funds and so on and so forth, offer the same concessions we offer on the roads for private investors to own locomotives on state-owned railway system so that we can use their money? Because the problem is this, JJ. We borrow money from asset managers who run the pension funds at 6, 8, or 10%, right? But when they own a share of our national infrastructure, they have to wait until they get a dividend for them to get paid.
Yeah.
And then we release some of that capital that we use to service the debt, to look after the railway system.
Just build a new railway from
No,
here to
we
PE.
don't have money, JJ, to even feed people right now because we make poor choices. We're not going to fantasize a solution into existence. We have to use the capital that is available in South Africa. The question is, what is the most sustainable, workable, financial, local ownership model?
Ladies and gentlemen, SONGEZO ZIBI, please give him a round of applause. Let's go and have dinner.
A lot of the time, the conversation is about the economy at a national level, at a macro level. What about the micro? What about the township economy that we speak about? What about the rural economy that we need to be speaking about? For me, it must be something to see so many young black people in this space. And I'm sure the majority of you come from rural areas, come from townships. It's the problem sometimes with our politicians is that they come on podiums and they tell us about what the problems are with the country, but they don't tell us, how did you make it to this point where you're currently at? Thank you.
All right, thank you, colleague. That was great. I think we'll just start with that one and then touch on some of the other comments before I take a second round.
If you treated our unemployment as the same level of emergency as COVID, and you said to the banks, as a Reserve Bank, because the finance minister can have this conversation with the governor of the Reserve Bank, we need to release 100 billion in liquidity reserves so that it can be used specifically for the kind of lending that you are referring to that entrepreneurs cannot get access to. That's how you begin to alter the structure.
Yeah. But it goes back to my point.
Okay.
I'm saying that the banks are losing money. The banks continue to profit.
Yeah.
So the problem is not so much that the liquidity that you speak about that needs to come from the Reserve Bank. I'm asking about the money that is currently available to the banks.
The part you didn't hear, Aldrin, that
Sure.
I said, the liquidity reserves are not government money. It's the bank money. It's the bank money. The regulations say, as Bank X deposit 17, I think it's between 10 and, it's between 12 and 15, no, it's between 10 and 12% of your capital with the Reserve Bank. So that if one day at some point in the future you get into trouble, we take some of your money and we use it to rescue you. Otherwise it sits there the whole time. Right now it's sitting. I'm saying to you, the way you solve part of the problem is to say that same amount of money goes back to the bank, but it must be used and ring-fenced for a specific purpose. Aldrin, you do not want a bank that's making a loss. You don't want a bank that's making a loss with your savings in the bank. Because it actually means the bank cannot honor your money that you want to withdraw in the ATM. So I think we must be careful of the things we wish for because we are frustrated. You want a bank that is financially robust because it can do this kind of lending. But how do you change the rules in such a way that you release the capital to the people that need it? Now I'm offering a solution. What I'm understanding you to say is, because the bank still makes a profit, the solution is problematic. It can't be. It can't be. Our own prudential authority can say you don't have to have liquidity reserves of 11 to 13%, can be 9%, right? And therefore that money must be used for a specific purpose. So that's what I'm saying, because we have to try and solve multiple things and prevent certain risks from coming through. Otherwise you get a VBS, and when Standard Bank becomes a VBS, it's, you know what I mean? So I've offered that solution. So let me, yeah.
All right, Klanti, you want to follow up?
I wanted to help him with one thing. I mean, I think the Chinese have been very successful in their monetary policy on this very basis, in which when there are tough times, they actually say to the banks, listen, on those reserves, can you actually push out money to support the economy?
Yes.
So in that sense, you can actually say, look, you have these reserves, can you push out some of that money in order to prop up, infrastructure spending,
yes.
all of that. So that's sort of the kind of thing I think you might be saying.
That's what I'm saying, Clint. In effect, that's what I'm saying, right?
All right, let's move off that
so
one.
the money is there.
And tell me about the third way.
So I need
round off that
to,
point.
so we're doing this in reverse, okay. So,
Yeah.
so
Yes,
the third way, John, I think JJ, to simplify.
Yeah, I am John. That's what the one J stands for.
JJ, I've said there are two propositions on the table, political propositions on the table. Proposition one, let the ANC and the DA work out a deal, and this election becomes an academic exercise. The second proposition is get rid of the ANC and the EFF, right? To the extent that you can have a moonshot and do all of these wonderful things. That proposition is premised on fear. That if these two bad political parties get together, the country will be in a far worse position. So rather come to us. That's not a compelling proposition. What we are saying, we need to do the hard work of imagination. We've offered a vision. I will not repeat it.
Yeah.
We've offered values. I will not repeat them. And we can have the conversation later on.
Yeah.
Those are the two things you need to drive to anchor all political and social, economic, and other transformation work that you are going to.
Civil service has been given a bad name. I think that's the essence of the question that was given. How do we get young people? You know, in other countries, it's actually a prestige to work for the public sector.
Yeah, I'll combine
Here
it
it's
with
not. Here you want to move as quickly as possible from public sector to go to another private sector and just be away from the politics.
So I'll combine that comment with Mpatisi's question, because I think they kind of speak to the same thing. The number one problem we have in our public sector is actually leadership. People follow people. If somebody has got credibility, you get a strong municipal manager, the municipal council is functioning well, it does not interfere in the work of the administration. The administrators carry out the mandate of the politicians that have been elected into office, but the work is done professionally and so on. Right? We might not like the political choices because ideologically we differ, whatever the case is, but the public servants do the work professionally and brilliantly. Young people will want to go and work in such an environment. What really chases people away is that no matter how hard you work, no matter how good you are, you will not get a promotion because you didn't sleep with somebody. Yeah. It's like that in municipalities, right? Or you don't belong to a faction in a political party, or you are in the wrong faction in a political party. People therefore don't want to work. The most common complaint we get, JJ, in all of these places that we go to, and by the way, it kind of answers, partly answer your question, part of your question, Aldrin. Women complain about sex for jobs, ne? It's rife, that thing. It's rife, that thing. Men, South African men behave badly when they have power in that way, right? So if you're a young woman, you are really brilliant at what you do, are you going to go and work there? You're not going to go and work there. You won't get an increase and all these kind of things. By the way, Aldrin, one of the reasons about 23,000 people a week now are joining Rise Mzansi is because actually we spend so much time in rural and peri-urban and informal settlements, breaking down these concepts into their simplest form and saying this should be the purpose of politics. You remember that example I made about climate change here and maize and this kind of thing? That's how we talk. That's how we talk. And people relate to that. And their minds are opened and they say, I can do this kind of politics, right? So what I'm saying is the most important thing that we do actually is empowerment of the mind. That really is a secret.
Let's take some more comments from the public. Jessica?
This isn't so much a challenge, and thank you for the lovely dinner. I came here this evening expecting new ideas. And I have to be honest with you, your ideas are largely provincial and populist. The suggestion that militarizing borders is going to deal with lawlessness and the economy is frankly just crass and reductionist. And when you do so, you are aligning yourself with some of the worst reactionary populist elements globally, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and domestically with sources of lawlessness like Operation Dudula and the like. Never mind the fact that militarization, from an economic standpoint, offers very little. You're not producing anything. Number two, while I am sympathetic to the grievances with gerontocratic tendencies and the old guard of the government, the idea of discounting the wisdom and experience of elders is highly problematic. Many people have their best ideas in their later stages of life. I'll give you an example. I'm serious. You might have mentioned I swallow my vowels. I'm not South African. And myself, even in my privileged position, have to deal with the extreme dysfunction of trying to obtain permits from Home Affairs. Nonetheless, I came to this country to work with a woman. Today would have been her 77th birthday, Mom Sizani Gubane. Mom Sizani organized rural women across KZN through the 70s and 80s. She set up the first ANC office in northern KZN at a very dangerous time. She left the ANC in 1995 after what surely would have been a lucrative career in government to organize rural women, 50,000 across KwaZulu-Natal, ending forms of gender-based violence such as ukutwala, and taking Ingonyama Trust to court over the the transfer of land rights through old PTOs into land leases. She did that in her 70s. So the idea that we discard people who have a great deal of experience, knowledge, and wisdom, that's not to say that we don't embrace new ideas and we don't form intergenerational dialogue and coalitions, but frankly, it's just another form through a generational lens, and you can't understand politics without generational conflict. I understand that. But it's a way of discarding people, and it's a form of populism on generational lens. And I think you really need to address that. And I would urge everyone in here to consider what you're doing. I say this if we're going to take seriously concepts of dignity, justice, fairness, and you mentioned equality. Well, you don't discount people based on their age, and you certainly do not based on their passport. I'm a historian by training, okay? I'm happy to talk about this at any stage with any of you at any time. There's no, look, you don't talk about laws of history, but one thing is consistent, and that is human migration. So again, I want to say on the point of borders, be very careful how you align yourself, what you do on your borders, and how you treat the outsider, how you treat the stranger, is a litmus test. Thank you.
Well, Richard, then let me ask you this. So, wait. So you mentioned two things that you were dissatisfied with. So what would your solutions then be? One, for South Africa and immigration. And number two, how would you then see intergenerational leadership happening in South Africa then?
Sure. Number one, let's talk about intergenerational leadership. If you're working in rural areas, you know that the fabric that has held communities together are older women. What apartheid did is it bankrupted, it caused an absence of men through the migrant labor system, and you had women take on all sorts of forms to hold their communities together, economic, affective, in a variety of forms of labor. So what you do is you intentionally build intergenerational dialogues, and you need the agitation of young people, but you need the wisdom of the old. Okay? The question of citizenship, the question of borders, is you have to create pathways to citizenship, number one, and permanent residency. And number two, you have to expand your political imagination beyond the nation state. And you have to think about, okay, citizenship second, human first.
Richard, for somebody who's accused me of reductionism, you are incredibly reductionist, first of all. Secondly, Richard, you don't listen so well. I never spoke about militarizing the borders. I didn't. That's what you should have done, Richard. No, Richard, it's my turn. Richard, it's my turn.
Will give you a chance. Just go to him.
I shut up while you spoke, so you need to calm down and listen. So, Richard, I said secure the borders. I never mentioned the military. If you don't understand, please ask. So that's the first thing. So please, let's just try and listen to one another in this conversation and not rush to reductionism and anger. Don't lecture me, Richard, about things you don't understand. Thanks, JJ.
All right. Richard, I'll give you a parting shot.
Oh, parting shot.
Yeah, give Richard a parting shot there.
We're running, okay.
Look,
it's a dialogue. Go on.
Look, I'm not going to go on too much with this. But the fact is, first of all, the notion that it's the notion I wasn't listening is quite condescending. But number two, when you use phrases like secure the border, you know that's a dog whistle. You do. And also assuming that people simply commit crimes by virtue of being undocumented. Some of these things are dog whistles, and I do have to say, yes, it's great that you have a few older people as advisors on your committee, but that you do have to match that with your rhetoric. Anyways, I'll let that be for now. Thank you for responding.
All right.
But I do think, be mindful of the dog whistles. That's all I'll say. Thank you. And frankly, personally, I expect, based on my experiences with most South Africans, much better. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kanyiso Sango. I'm just a volunteer from Midrand, just a supporter of the movement. I want to make 2 comments and then 1 question. First comment is to say, part of what drew me to Rise is the nuance, which with the leader, SONGEZO, has answered that question, and the way that he deals with complex issues around immigration, not to denigrate anyone or to provide easy answers. So 1, I just want to say I fully agree with the answer that was given into that question about immigration. My second question, my second comment kind of responds to the comments made by Aldrian to say that Rise has no proper space in this country. As someone who's been interested in politics for a long time, but was dejected at the options available to him, where you have one party which is right-wing, but caters to a minority, another which is far left-wing, but also adopts far right-wing kind of ways of operating, and a ruling party which claims to be a progressive center-left movement, but is really at this stage just a movement for the accumulation of wealth for the few. So where Rise comes in, I think, is to be a progressive movement of the center-left, one that deals with politics in a very nuanced way, but also deals with politics in a very caring way, engages with communities. And to that point, my question is a simple one. It's just to ask, I know that Rise had engaged in a long process of talking to communities, of asking what the real concerns were of communities. We've had a lot of discussion here, of course, of what at an intellectual level, what we think the problems of the politics of this country are. But I'd be interested to have kind of an in-depth discussion about what were the responses of people in those communities. What did they say that they felt government should be doing for them? Where was government not helping them? Where can government help them going forward? What were those concerns really raised across the country? Can you perhaps kind of generalize as to what those were? Thank you.
All right, we're going to just park that one because there's a potential of 30 minutes. But let's park it, we'll come. Colleague from Carte Blanche, can you give me some Carte Blanche questions to him?
My question is actually very short and sharp. It's around longevity. So we've heard and seen new political parties coming to the fray, Ahang, Cope, etc., etc. We know why. We know exactly why. And a lot of the times, they are appealing enough to even invite the likes of AJJ and more. A lot of the times, they sound good, they look good, they say the right things, and we vote for them because we're waiting for this change. The Eno effect is so real when it comes to new political parties. There's this effervescence initially, and then from nowhere it dies down, and it's like it never happened, ahang, again. What is Rise Mzansi going to do to ensure and sustain this longevity? We speak of parties like the EFF, you've mentioned Action SA, who've done relatively well in trying to stay in the fray. But generally, the new parties, as much as there's excitement initially, they always tend to die a very slow and ugly and painful death. How are we going to be ensured as voters that come the next elections after 2024, Rise Mzansi will still exist?
Sure. Okay.
Do you have space for one more?
Yeah, take one more, Jessica.
Okay.
You mentioned that there has to be a change in the country's political structure, and you made mention of the electoral system in South Africa. I just want to know, what do you see as the right electoral system for this country? Because I personally am one who likes a presidential system. I like a first past the post system because I like the fact that, I can actually ask my leaders exactly, like, why do you want to run for president? Why do you want to run for, premier? Why do you want to be an honorable member of parliament? We aren't really given that opportunity, every election. Like next year, sharp, we're going to be given a list. They say, take it. And we don't really question it that much. So I just want to know, what's the right system, the electoral system for this country going forward?
Thank you.
All right, Songezo, just tackle those three.
Yes, and I'll be unusually short, JJ. So what did the people say? I will just use one example, one anecdote, right, to give you a sense of why listening is important. We have, so one of the things we've picked up is hunger. That is actually really pervasive. And this was even before these recent reports came out, right? That hunger is pervasive. And you get to understand that insight when you ask someone, why do you want a job? It seems like a dumb question, but when you say, why do you want a job? Somebody says, because I want to buy food. Then you say, when last did you buy food? When last did you get food or eat? They say yesterday. And when you look at your watch, it's 4 p.m., which means they have not eaten that day. And that leads you into a different frame of thinking about policy, which is, I can't just use jobs as a blunt instrument. I have to think of multiple solutions that sustain people in the short term, that eventually takes them to economic independence later on. But there is a continuum of how you get there. Makashule Ghana talks about single mothers a lot. There are women who give up jobs for two reasons. One, there are no childcare facilities in their community. Two, it is too expensive transport-wise to get to the job and back. So they essentially slaving away. People have told us those kind of things. And that is why we are insisting on coming up with integrated solutions to problems rather than saying, how are you going to solve everything in silos? So that's the first. The question of the longevity of Rise Mzansi. A lot of political parties were breakaways, ne? Firstly. Secondly, we've rejected the notion, which is the whole point of the third way. We've rejected the notion that mere unhappiness or fear of some or other political party becomes the core of your existence. You will not go a long distance in that way. So we've decided to do the hard work of coming up with a vision, of coming up with values, of listening to people, coming up with reform priorities, all the way to how we do our candidate nomination and how we organize. We do a lot of door-to-door, in fact, every day. Our volunteers and organizers do door-to-door, street side meetings, meetings under trees, and so on. It is important to realize our vision, that we continue doing so all the way through to 2029 when we get a majority. It can't be about this next election. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. We don't have, the only politician who comes from another political party is that man over there, Makashule Ghana. We have resisted the temptation to go and
is he the only one?
People.
He didn't bring anybody with him.
So on the last question, which is what do we see as the right electoral system? So, you know, the presidential thing is really attractive because we watch American television a lot. But the constitutional architecture of the United States sees the presidency as the entire executive branch of government. Our system doesn't quite work in that way. And so personally, and we haven't had this conversation within Rise Mzansi about whether we need to have a presidential system. And this is my personal opinion. Unless you're going to alter our entire constitutional structure to have a presidential system, rather don't go there. Because that constitutional amendment will take forever. I think you can still get a good president working through parliament if MPs are elected directly by constituencies that are identifiable and they can be held accountable. The problem we have is that, I don't know, by a show of hands, who knows who represents them in parliament here? How many hands? 1, 2. This is a problem, right? That's a problem I believe we need to solve. If you read that document, you'll see a hell of a lot more about the executive, about the judicial branch and that kind of thing. I won't go into that kind of detail. But give power back to the people as far as possible. Make politicians more accountable to the people that elected them. And they must have identifiable constituencies so that I can take responsibility for electing JJ, who has always been a problem. Thank you.
Okay, any questions in this corner? This corner is dead. Anybody here? No.
Okay, thank you so much. I really don't have a question. My name is Nyanko Mamaro. I'm a professor at the University of Johannesburg Business School, and also I was a former banker and a development economist. So I should just say thank you so much. I like the vision and the intention that we need to do something about reducing extreme poverty. So I just want to share one small thing. Maybe you already know about it. The question is, how do we go about it? I like you say, no, it's not about you guys asking me the questions, but it is we together as a collective coming up with the solutions. Yes. So I have been really critically thinking about the development and the initiatives which is happening in India. I've been in academia for some time. I've been in the government and I've been in the corporate sector. And I'm also a farmer. So I think I know everything around. I've been in 20 countries. So I think I have some few experience to share. But I'll be very specific. I'm really interested. I was really questioning the value of the graduate we produce as the current academic system. I would use just one example. It happened in Tanzania. It happened in Nigeria. There was a walk-in interview for immigration department. The salary is just $500. And more than 10,000 graduates in Tanzania, they killed themselves, tried to get in on that walk-in interview. I never knew how high is unemployment among graduates. Dangote was looking for 200 drivers for his lorries for cement. More than 2,000 MBA applied and a lot of other PhD applied. What is just saying, our education system is not working. If it is working, we shouldn't have so many useless graduates who can't be employed. We just need to think outside the box. So India, I think according to the research by the World Bank, they have reduced the extreme poverty at the fastest rate than any other countries. But they have very strong policies. So I'll go back on the financial inclusions because it's everything. So the banks, they will say we are not going to give loans to majority of the people because their business model doesn't work. So India, what they did, they have self-employment training institute. Then they say the banks and this institute, you're going to work together, you're going to train and build capacity for these people. And once they graduate, you give them the loans, they go, they start the business. So I'm just giving you a rough idea. In public policy, we have what we call policy learning and lesson drawing. So maybe we can borrow some idea there. And I'll be willing to volunteer my intellectual capital to make it happen. Thank you.
Viva!
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Truly exciting. Jessica?
All right, Tessa is ready.
Someone else?
Yes, we do. Tessa is ready, and then we've got, I don't know what's going to happen here because we've got two burning from the same table and from that table
It's okay.
as well.
Let's take all of them.
Then
we're going to do a concluding remark with the leader now. Yeah.
Hi, everyone, once again. The way I understand democracy, a lot of it has to work, but it's also self-driven. And in our country, self-awareness, personal development are a key factor to the individual participating and being an active citizen. So when you say social democracy, what exactly do you mean? What's the angle? And how do we get more people just simply to be self-aware when they're still just on level 1 of Maslow's hierarchy just to feed themselves in safety and security?
Sure, thank you, Tessa. Didn't you want to drop the mic after you were done, or not so much? Okay, thank you, Tessa.
Oh, she's still running.
Hi, sir.
Hi there. I'm Kathuku. And my question is sort of leading back to what Aldrin was asking earlier about the state's role in the economy. And we've acknowledged that obviously the fiscus is very tight, right? So we're going to incorporate the private sector into how we essentially fund development. But if anything, the last few days have shown us is that profits come before development. And if that is the scenario, and it's also leading back, again, what Aldrin was saying is we've witnessed financialization in the South African economy where financial services have become a bigger chunk of South Africa's economy while investing in non-productive assets and not creating jobs. I can go into a long economics lecture, but I won't do that. Essentially, what I'm trying to ask is, in order to effectively incorporate the private sector into whatever the development goals are of government, first, you probably need to have a clean, corrupt-free government. But how else are we going to incorporate the private sector into effectively funding development within the country at favorable rates? One of the suggestions would be a boogie word, which is prescribed assets, but it doesn't even have to be that. There have to be proper mechanisms beyond just saying, we're going to bring the private sector in, and how do we effectively incorporate them to fund development within the South African economy? Well, one of the suggestions is prescribed assets. It's not the only solution. I'm not a macroeconomist myself. But there are ways that we have to acknowledge that the private sector, while they are a partner, at the end of the day, they do have their interests, which is the bottom line. I'm not saying profit cannot be made, but there's also an acknowledgement that we have to see that they can't, that government also, as much as government has to cooperate with them, business also has to cooperate with government and the state.
Thank you so much.
All right, Tom.
Noted.
Okay. Hi again. So I hope you don't mind. I just jotted down a few things so that I don't forget. Earlier, I had made a point about combating corruption through transparency, and what I meant by that is we have magicians for politicians who make billions of money just disappear, right? And I was saying that, right, as a solution going forward, I think we need to achieve a level of transparency and accountability in our country where our leaders can effectively say, this is the amount that we've received, or this is the amount of money that we've procured, and this is how we've spent it, whether they show it physically through buildings that they've created or through employment. But I think we need to achieve a level of transparency where people can have something to believe in without doubt. The other thing I also wanted to speak about is our grant system here in South Africa. I think there's a lot of controversy about it because on one side, we know historically it's there to combat the inequalities brought by apartheid. But on the other side, other views are that it has made South Africans lazy and complacent. But I don't think that's just the true root cause of it. The true root cause of it, I think, boils down to it's not complacency, I think it's despair. Because what Baba has mentioned earlier is that one of the things that he wanted to challenge was hunger. And I think that's also simply not enough because if we look at the high amount of employment, I think we need to take it a step further by making it mandatory by law, compulsory for each and every company who is hiring people, at least for the hiring new employees for the next couple of months, to basically provide transport funds to them. Because how is it fair that you have people who are living on a grant, for example, you expect them to arrange transport, catching 3 taxis and a bus and a plane, you name it. On top of that, like you said earlier, combat the whole aspect of hunger. And I think if you look at poverty and unemployment as a fast-flowing river, could you not say that a small change such as providing funds to basically say, in your conquest of finding employment, here is allocation, funding allocated to you. That is something that can essentially combat greater socioeconomic issues such as crime. I'm not saying that there's a justification for why people do crime, but there's an explanation for it because like Tebs mentioned earlier, that there's a hierarchy of needs, right? When people feel like their basic needs aren't met, they resort to any means necessary to get what they want. Sorry, one last point, I'm so sorry. I just want to address just one last final question. Not that I know any of these older politicians that you mentioned earlier, but I think one thing that they shared as common as any political party is the fact that they have goals, they have ambitions, and those are driving factors. But I think power tends to corrupt people. So my question, sir, and it's meant very, very respectfully, is what is your plan on ensuring that you are held accountable? Because I think what this country needs is not just leadership that's rooted in academia or even empathy. I think we need leadership that is not tone deaf to the basic needs of the most oppressed people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, are you ready to bear with us?
Is there one more?
Are you ready to bear with us? Because table 7 has got 2, but they've been burning. So it's
burning,
Nell
all right.
and it's Jamie.
All right, let's see. But they must keep it brief.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Mighty from the Africa Research Desk. My question, Mr. ZIBI, is around the developments in technology right now. We have seen the advancement of artificial intelligence with ChatGPT and even that it may have achieved AGI. I hear you on the hunger question and how you want to make sure, you know, young people in Eastern Cape, the 48%, can also get food and go and look for jobs. I'm concerned about the pace at which technology is moving, contrasted with the fact that less than 50,000 matrics this year are writing IT, for instance. And I wonder what ideas you have around closing this particular gap, because some of the jobs that you are seeking these young people to have are going to become obsolete in a very short space of time. That's the first bucket of questions. The second one pertains to the economic structure. The current economic structure is an oligopoly extractive structure, which allows for these big 4 banks, big 4 telecoms providers to take advantage of South Africans, big 4 medical aids, whatever the case may be. They have become so dominant that they are dismissive, arrogant, dismissive, and abusive in many instances. The insurance companies as well, some of the tendencies that have crept in, I think, are very troubling and are not reflective of a competitive economy with something close to a perfect market. We've moved away from that. I wonder what you think about how to remedy that particular problem. And finally, what do you do to change the risk appetite of banks? Even if you were to increase the access of funding that comes from the Reserve Bank, the banks have got a very, very low risk appetite, ranked in the top 20 in the world, but 96th in funding small enterprises. And I'm sure you've seen those numbers from the Global Competitiveness Report. What will change about the risk appetite even if you make this particular remedy effective? And I think as a bonus one, I don't know if you remember them all, we've been burning. What are you going to do about the human nature problem with corruption? Because a lot of the premises of how you solve these things, it's almost as if there's a assumed behavioral change. Whether it's at the border or at the police station, people have now become accustomed to nchoncho. So how do you then resolve that across the public service when there is such a culture of taking money from the side? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And lastly, Nell.
Hello, Songezo. I just have 2 short questions, I promise. I think the first one is just generally related to the questions around the general structure of the country. I think there's been a lot of conversation, perhaps even to the run-up of this discussion, about the existence and the sustainability of provinces. And I think for the most part, when you speak about an ably led state where we're able to hold our parliamentarians accountable, the question is always then going to be asked about whether we still do need provinces, if there's actually some kind of efficacy behind that. And also just as a byline to that, I guess, just to maybe perhaps ask, just between you and I, what your views are with regards with regards to the kind of what I would rather regard as like deeply racist agitations we're seeing in the Western Cape, which will only get worse, I think, as the elections come closer, around like Cape independence, which I think is a pipe dream, but would be interested to hear your thoughts. And then I think the last question then to round it up is more about like national identity. I think we often speak as South Africans about how we want to celebrate, cultural experiences together. But I think, with the dearth of any kind of investment and considered, appropriate behavior, we haven't really been able to create some kind of, charitable experiences that we can actually define as national experiences. We consider Heritage Day to be the big one, and maybe Christmas, and everything else after that is, for the taking. Just curious to understand what your idea around national identity looks like. Are there any specific heritages, any things that we think within the manifesto itself that you'll be sharing with us that you think will be very sacrosanct for South Africa, or a vision of South Africa that you think is relevant? Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, can we give a round of applause to all the participants? I think what I liked about what you said earlier is that you don't have all the answers. You may pretend to have all of them, but
Yeah.
you don't. So please keep it brief in terms of just highlights, so that we can have 1 or 2 minutes to round off the conversation.
There's a social democracy. So it's social democratic values, really. So what we've done is we've reflected on South Africa's history, legacy, colonialism, apartheid, patriarchy, and, right? And asked ourselves, what is the best moral framework on which we should build not just politically, but a new society? In other words, what is this framework that we use to, in our respective sectors, work towards the same goal in terms of the society we want to be? Those values are freedom, equality, solidarity, justice, and we've added integrity. These values are interrelated. Freedom is probably the most important. It forces you to ask different questions about the meaning of freedom. So for instance, if you are not able to earn the same income as a man for same work as a woman, that's an element of oppression. You are not free. You need to fix, as an example. There are also certain principles that are important. One of the reasons solidarity is important is that we become a society that takes a decision that we are not going to leave anyone behind. Taking a decision, a political decision, to say every family, every human being in South Africa should have 3 healthy meals a day makes you think differently about national policy. In that becomes a priority over many other things. You don't do a trade-off between, saving SAA and putting food on the table for people. You make a conscious decision to say, we believe in human solidarity. Our taxes, the taxes of companies and so on, must partly be used to make sure that every family can eat. That's what solidarity looks like. When you are not longer hungry, you are better able to pursue your other freedoms, to build a life in which we can say that the society is becoming equal and so on. I don't want to go deep into the theory because JJ said in brief, but it's a value system. It's a political and social value system that we're talking about. In that way, if you're in a company or sports or whatever the case is, you might decide that you're going to advance these values in a particular way. I'm sad, JJ, we didn't talk about the arts, by the way. The second question had to do with the private sector in the economy. I'll just make one example. The government sets prices for electricity in South Africa, all of them. All of them. NERSA does, right? I am not aware that you can buy electricity at a different price. It's either municipalities apply to NERSA and also Eskom applies to NERSA. NERSA is a government agency. Now, if your intention with involving, if the fear with involving some private investment in infrastructure is that you are going to have price gouging, the government sets the price. We set the price. We set the price of petrol. We set the price of diesel, of paraffin, and all of these things. What is the fear? There is a measure of control. So the reason we say we need a strong functioning state is so that we can do those things and you can manage the risk of price gouging where people pay in poor communities too much for electricity. We control that. So that's just one example. I don't want to go into detail, JJ. I will deal with the transparency question together with the human nature, with corruption, and so on. I'll deal with those together. So one of the things we have said in order to fight corruption, for instance, that electoral system reform, by the way, is designed to stop corruption. If you look on our website, go to our politics and key reform priorities. We go into a lot more detail with it. But let me give you an example about the current situation that we have. The South African presidency is very powerful. The president appoints SARS commissioner, DGs, judges, the whole works. There are some interviews, SA Reserve Bank governor, all of these, right? When you have such discretion vested in the executive and you get a corrupt president, what do you get? So what we're saying is you need to change the rules to reduce the amount of discretionary power that politicians have, because it is a recipe for corruption. Transparency is really important in that formula. I'll make an example. If municipalities were forced to publish who got the tenders every 3 months, to put it in a notice outside, believe me, there would be a lot of things that change, because you illuminate the information, make it compulsory. I was a journalist. If you make a PIA application, 99% of the time they refuse because they want to keep the information secret. So I can go on and on, but I think you control human nature by making certain disclosures and changing the rules so that even those you think will behave well are nonetheless treated as the same as those who might behave badly. They must all disclose in terms of what tenders were given and that sort of thing. And then I want to just talk broadly. So my personal opinion in my book, I've said do away with provinces, but I'll deal with it together with the tendencies in the Western Cape. So, like white people in the Western Cape like what I'm saying until they get to that part. They're like, no, we want to keep the Western Cape so that the DA can run it. Yeah. Personally, and this is not Rise Mzansi's policy, personally, I just feel that we need to rethink provinces seriously. It's a long story, but
go back to 4.
Personal view of mine.
Go back to 4 provinces.
No.
Or not have them at all.
Devolve. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get into that rabbit hole. I can say I'm making my colleagues nervous. And then I think we've dealt with the risk appetite of banks. I think we really had a long discussion about it. You need to change the regulations. You need to make certain things mandatory. But I just want to say one thing. Guys, banks don't have money. It's your money. It's your money. When I was at the bank, one of the things I used to fight with the bankers about, when I felt they were lending recklessly, actually, is to say, guys, this is not the bank's money. This is depositors' money that you are playing fast and loose with. Banks don't have their own money, guys. It's your money. So we just also need to be careful about how they lend that money. It's yours. The banks don't have their money. It's yours. They make money out of your money. So the money making is done through interest rates. They get money from you, they lend it to JJ. JJ pays an interest rate, then the bank gets money. But it's your money. We must be careful about saying banks can play fast and loose with your money and your savings. That's a dark place we can get to. Let's be careful.
But sorry, if I can come in there, are you saying we should go easy on forcing them to transform? Because it's quite clear that they don't have an appetite of transforming.
No.
With their
JJ,
track record up to so far.
JJ, we must be able to work with complexity here. So, and I'll tell an anecdote. I know we said we're going to be sure. I'll tell an anecdote. So I worked for ABSA, okay? And I was responsible for comms and marketing throughout the continent. Well, one of the things we had to do specifically in Kenya, in Ghana, and all of these countries was to show people how big ABSA is here, that it is not going to fail. Because bank failures in these countries happen all the time. And now we're not Barclays, we're not an overseas bank, therefore we are likely to fail. When banks fail, people lose money. Look at VBS. So guys, I am fully with lending that is more accessible, that is cheaper with a higher risk appetite. I am all for it. All I'm asking, remember, it is not these people's money. It is your money. When half of us are not able to pay that money back, you pay for it. It is your money. It's so important. It's not about whether we don't want transformation, because you know, there were people who were complaining about VBS. Guess who was queuing outside, not having access to their money? It's black cocos.
Pensioners.
Yes, it's black cocos. So all I'm saying, guys, let's try and get used to the idea of working with complexity. And the suggestion I was making earlier on, to say, relax some of the regulations which lower the lending risk appetite in financial institutions, and mandate that the portion of the liquidity reserves, for instance, or even the capital reserves that has been released must go to certain classes of lenders, the people who are not able to get a loan
What
from
do
a
you
bank.
do with DFIs?
No, development funding institutions like Development Bank and so.
Yeah, and IDC, NEF, CFA, you name it.
That's another long conversation. So the IDC and all of these guys. So one of the things about having a weak fiscal is that, by the way, these guys also borrow that money, ne?
Yeah.
You know they do, right? It's not money that's just taken, they borrow it. So and what they do, there's something called the ZIBI, the Johannesburg Interbank Lending Rate and so on. The rate at which, interest rate at which banks lend to one another. It's very low, right? It's like 2-3% or whatever, and they lend on to somebody else at X%. The problem is, if you are an IDC or you are whoever, you also, the land bank as an example, right? The land bank's lenders insisted that the land bank moves under treasury during the bad years, right? So it's not money that they make and they get somehow. So there is a complex system that has to be managed in such a way that we can release more capital into people who need it and can actually create jobs. And the last thing I'm going to say is, I don't want us to inadvertently say anybody who wants a loan must get it. We must not inadvertently say that, because lending without criteria ends in tears. Each of you know, when you lend money to that cousin of yours with a reputation for not paying that money back, you either have to write it off or you break the family relationship. It is no different for a bank. I am sorry, guys, I am not in the business of saying things that people want to hear because I want votes. This is not easy. It's complex. It's got risks in it.
So big is out for Rasmus.
No. By the way, I mean, you know, what we agree with is that for the poorest family, for the poorest South Africans, you need state transfers. In fact, the social grant as we have it is not enough.
Yeah.
Okay? But we can't use that as a blunt instrument to solve other structural problems we refuse to look at. Let me make an example. Let's say we have to have big of 2,000 rand.
Yeah.
I live in Orange Farm. I work in Joburg. How far does that take me per month? With transport expenses, with expensive electricity. And so how far does that take me? Shouldn't we also say we need an effective state-owned public transport system?
Yeah.
That costs a fraction of what people pay for taxes, as an example? Shouldn't we say that? That's a solution, right?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we say people who are on social grants should pay a lower price for the no-name brands in stores so that they can get more nutritious food, right? This is an obsession of lefties, middle-class lefties who don't want to deal with the complex problems that we have to deal with. I am not opposed to state transfers, but guys, can we please recognize that people deal with other real problems too? How does Big solve the problem for that mother who can't keep a job because there's no daycare in their community? Who looks after the child of the domestic worker who's looking after somebody's child? So how big does Big have to be?
Very big.
You know what I mean? So let's think more carefully about problems and not be lazy and try and solve them.
Yeah, I was confused about is Big not meant to intervene for those who are unemployed? Because you mentioned Big and employment in the same sentence.
No. Big is for everybody.
It's for everybody. Okay, that's crazy.
I mean,
anyway,
economically, there is a logic for it. I'm just saying you need to apply it in context, right?
Yeah.
You can't take something that you think works in California and just do it here as it is.
Can I challenge Rais Mzansi on one thing? You talked a lot about hunger.
Yes.
Have you started a food bank of some kind, even if it's a small scale, as Rais Mzansi? Just one.
No. By the way, JJ, I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. I was in Manenberg just last week. Our volunteers, they are working on community gardens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're thinking of something
it's just because we have to have different interventions. Let me make another practical example. So we have lots of land in rural Eastern Cape, in the Transkei. Generally, people have land, right? What we don't have is piped water we can use.
Yeah.
For the plants for the food that we can produce, right? I come from a family of farmers, JJ. I still wake up at 4 a.m. because since childhood, that's how I was raised, right? Yeah. We've got land, but we don't have water. Let's go back to Big. The simplistic lefty says, just give them Big. I will say, make sure every home has piped water on the property, not a communal tap, on the property, because those people can connect a hose pipe and they water the garden and not have to go to Mkomanzi River, which is where we go in my village, with a 25-liter drum, which is just a fraction of what you need to water the plants that you have. So let's not be simplistic and lazy. Let's deal with the complexity.
All right, we're going to have to round off now. I'm sure everybody needs to go. You were rising at a time where the global politics are very complex. And we saw South Africa, not knowing south from north in some of the foreign policy decisions. Can you sum it up for me? What will be your policy direction in the current global polarization?
JJ, you ask a very complex question, then you say in 2 minutes. JJ, I think there should be two things that drive South African, or three things that drive South African foreign policy. The first is our economic interest. It's our economic interest. We should have solid functioning diplomatic relations in order specifically to realize commercial opportunities for South Africa to export to those countries or us to get access to goods and services unhindered. Yeah. That's important, right? So that's number one. The second thing that should be important is forming relationships between peoples. The mistake that the ANC makes is to form relations with governments. You need relations between peoples. We want to build a relationship between the South African and the Chinese people, between the South African and the Japanese people, and. That's where cultural exchanges, sport, and these kind of things, that's a terrain in which that happens. Because from that comes real nation-to-nation friendships. That's the second thing. The third thing should be the advancement of human rights globally, right? Part of that also means we have to accept that we have to give people asylum when they come here because they're being persecuted in other countries, as an example. But it also means we make the kind of interventions that are going to make sure that human beings across the world are able to access the same level of human rights protections that we have in South Africa.
Who funds Rise Mzansi. Can you give us a straight answer?
I wish it was one person, JJ. We have hundreds of donors from Rise Mzansi. Hundreds. Yeah, we've got hundreds of donors at Rise Mzansi.
So you're not poor?
No, we need money, JJ. Yo! We need money. But we've got hundreds of donors at Rise Mzansi. In fact, I write a newsletter every Monday. Who gets Rise on Monday here? Okay. You know what I do at the bottom of each one, right? What do? I flog you guys for money. Every single time, JJ.
Yeah.
And people give us anything from 50 Rand all the way. There are people with more means who've been able to give us 100,000, 500,000, R1 million, and so on. The campaign that we are on now, by the way, is for people with means who can afford 99,000 Rand, about 500 of them, to give us 99,000 Rand. The reason 99,000 is important is because people are afraid of being victimized by the ANC. They don't want to be declared to the IEC.
Yeah.
So we are trying to raise about 50 million Rand from people who can afford to mobilize 99,000 Rand. It doesn't have to be you alone. You can have 10 of your friends in one meeting and you rustle 99,000, including your rich uncle who can give 50,000 Rand.
Yeah.
Democratic change costs
when you say
money.
you alone, you're not meaning me specific, because my wife is here, so I don't want to.
No, I'm talking to people. I'm talking to people in the room. By the way, we are now a registered political party.
Okay.
We will have to publish, at least there are two types of declaration. The people who've donated to us more than 100,000 Rand have to declare to the IEC.
Yeah.
When they give us money, we make this clear and we tell them, this is how you declare to the IEC. We will also declare those people to the IEC. When our turn comes, because the IEC publishes this periodically, you can go and have a look.
Is there anybody you've been afraid to offend because you thought if I offend them, they may affect us wise?
So there's a couple of things, JJ. The first one is we've lost money because of disagreement, by the way, over issues.
Okay, good.
And I would say in the magnitude of about 100 million that we could have raised.
Sure.
Right? We have, right?
Yeah.
People who say, why is that person in your team? We don't like them.
Yeah.
Get rid of them. And so you have to...
Is it true that you have been you're invited to the moonshot and with a financial incentive or not, or is it just a rumor?
No, I will just give a context with the moonshot. The moonshot idea is significantly a product of political donors, and that comes out of irritation among some donors that political parties, rich man, Aldrin Sampier here, gets a visit from the DA, gets a visit from Action SA, gets a visit from this and that other person. And some of these people decided, no, you guys need to work together and so on.
Yeah.
Right? The problem with the proposition is that it surrenders a level of control to donors that we are not comfortable with. Including influencing our strategy and the politics that we represent and so on. And then we said, no, so we've lost that money. There are also people who have not donated to us because they are afraid of victimization by the ANC. People who actually with a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, with this declaration thing, I can't do it and so on. There is that class of person. And so it's really difficult to raise money. So we've had those instances. We do have difficult conversations, though, with people who, because in the fundraising conversation, people talk about the rosy future and what you can achieve and that sort of thing. And then they see me here on stage saying what I've been saying, and then they call me the next morning.
Yes, you say no.
I didn't know, man. That's your position. Not really. So you get those. I mean, it's a headache, right?
Yeah.
And you have to deal with it. But
all right.
But yeah. Anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rise Mzansi's rising star.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's celebrate him. I think quite some clarity of thought that is needed in our politics. So wishing you all the best as you go to us. Let's do this in Durban. We do everything in Joburg. Let's do it in Durban.
Yeah. That we can do it in Durban, JJ.
Perfect.
Okay.
There's an
Get a sponsor. Get a sponsor.
We'll get a sponsor. Don't worry. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Go well. Good night.